We're so glad you're here today. You're in for a treat. Born in Rochester, New York, Marie Howe attended Sacred Heart Convent School and the University of Windsor. She earned an MFA from Columbia University. She has taught at Sarah Lawrence College, Columbia University, and NYU, and she has been the recipient of several prestigious fellowships, really too many to name. She was named the Poet Laureate of New York in 2012, a post she held for 2 years. I urge you to go to the World Wide Web and listen to the most excellent interview of Marie Howe, and I recommend the unedited version by Krista Tippett from the podcast On Being. You will hear these two thoughtful people discussing the complexities of being human and the challenges of poets to comment on the nature of humanity in the limited sacred space of a poem. I came away from that interview so impressed by Marie Howe's sincerity and integrity that she shows in her everyday life. See, I feel as if I know her because I've read her work and listened to her, and especially in her poetry. When David gave me the great honor of introducing Marie Howe, I immediately ordered several of her books. I had been searching the web for individual poems as soon as we got the email that she was going to be our poet this year. But I knew I would need the books. I thought I would share that one late night, not too long ago, I sat by my mother's bedside in the hospital. David, we're not supposed to be this emotional. I sat by my mother's side in the hospital, listening to her breathe and holding a flashlight by which I was reading the books of Howe's poetry, when I stumbled upon these lines from the book Magdalene. And I should say before I start that my mother is okay now. That night I wasn't sure she would make it. And these were Marie's words that I read. The seventh devil was the way my mother looked when she was dying, the sound she made. Her mouth wrenched to the right and kept open so as to take in so much air. The gurgling sound so loud, we had to speak louder to hear each other over it. And I remember reading those words, those lines, and looking at my mother and wondering how a woman, excuse me, and wondering how a woman I did not know knew so intimately what I was experiencing. I remembered then the words from the stage manager in Thornton Wilder's play, Our Town, who says when Emily asks, does anyone ever realize life when they live it every minute? And the stage manager replies, no, saints and poets, maybe. They do some. Marie Howe is a poet who realizes life and helps us realize it some too. Please join with me in welcoming her to the Christian Scholars Conference.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you, David. Thank you, Sue. You two are so beautiful. Does this have to be up? Okay. I keep thinking when the two of you were talking, Kafka said, art takes an axe to the frozen sea within us, you know? And this, since I've stepped into this conference, it's every minute has felt like a sacrament, really. Such relational work and talk. I was just with John and Sue, with a beautiful group of people talking, and now I get to be here with you all. Thank you very, very much for inviting me. Can you all hear me all right? I grew up as the oldest girl of a very large Catholic family, and I grew up with the Old Testament and the New Testament, and I loved the characters in those stories. I used to write Christmas plays for my parents and make all my brothers and sisters be in them. my brothers and sisters hated this. And by the end, it was like the late 60s, those plays got pretty radical. There were angels with machine guns and stuff. Um, but these characters have never left me. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s when I learned about the Jewish tradition of midrash, of imagining into the Torah, the stories, and the silences in those stories. And I realized that was in part some of what gave me the confidence to do some of the work I do regarding these characters. Sometimes, as Emily Dickinson said, the way to tell something is to tell it slant because you don't understand it yourself. So one of the first poems in my first book is called Part of Eve's Discussion. And it's in the voice of Eve, our girl, trying to talk about what happened to her. Short poem, a prose poem, Part of Eve's Discussion. It was like the moment when a bird decides not to eat from your hand and flies, just before it flies. The moment the rivers seem to still and stop because a storm is coming, but there is no storm. As when 100 starlings lift and bank together before they wheel and drop, very much like the moment driving on bad ice, when it occurs to you your car could spin just before it slowly begins to spin, like the moment just before you forgot what it was you were about to say. It was like that. And after that, it was still like that, only all the time. Only all the time, our plight. Rilke, the great German poet, said, we are not really at home in this world, which seems to be our sense of anxiety. After I wrote my first book, I'm the oldest of 9 children, and my brother John was the second from the youngest. But he and I were intimate friends, really, since the day he was born, I think. We were very close. I read everything I ever wrote to him, and he was very tough. You know how hard it is to find a tough reader? I'd call him up and say, I've written something new, listen to this, and he'd go, mm-hmm. And I go, what? He goes, well, you knew that already, didn't you? I'd be like, damn. But the birds, he goes, the birds are nice. He was tough. He was so good. He would say, now go back and write something you don't know. Oh. So he got sober at 23, and he contracted AIDS probably around 25. And this was the early days of AIDS, when people died very quickly, sometimes weeks, months, quickly. Pneumocystis pneumonia took people down. All his friends died. And so John died at 28, which was, as many of you know, all of you here probably had to deal with an unbearable death. It was unbearable. But the great news is that I could, after a time, begin to try and tell some of the stories about him, but not in a way that I already knew, because he was still reading, if you will. So I'm going to read one poem called For 3 Days. And I might actually be talking to people who know these stories. I cannot tell you how gratified I am. Remember Lazarus and how, the sisters call for Jesus. He says, I'll be there in a minute. I'll be there in a day or two. I'll be there. He arrives too late. Lazarus is dead. Mary and then Martha both come out and say to him what I quote in this poem, For 3 days. For 3 days now, I've been trying to think of another word for gratitude because my brother could have died and didn't. Because for a week, we stood in the intensive care unit trying not to imagine how it would be then afterwards. My youngest brother, Andy, said, "This is so weird. I don't know if I'll be talking with John today or buying a pair of pants for his funeral." And I hated him for saying it because it was true and seemed to tilt it because I had been writing his elegy in my head during the 7-hour drive there and trying not to. Thinking meant not thinking. It meant imagining my brother surrounded by light, like Schrodinger's cat that would be dead if you looked and might live if you didn't. And then it got better. And then it got worse. And it's a story now. He came back. And I did, by that time, imagine him dead. And I did begin to write the other story, how the crowd in the stifling church snapped to a tearful attention, how my brother lived again for a few minutes through me. And although I know I couldn't help it, because fear has its own language and its own story, and because even grief provides a living remedy, I can't help but think of that woman who said to him whom she considered her savior, "If thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." How she might have practiced her speech, and how she too might have stood trembling, unable to meet the eyes of the dear, familiar figure that stumbled from the cave when the compassionate fist of God opened and crushed her with gratitude and shame. Thank you. So I just want to read maybe a couple more, maybe one more about Johnny. Is there anyone here who has a phobia? Only two, really? Okay. What's your phobia, sir? Yeah, me too. Yeah, I understand. I have that too. Somebody else? What's yours? So it's related? Anybody who has the weirdest phobia? Hmm. Now you wouldn't have that if you lived in New York. There are no drive-through windows. Just move to Manhattan. It'll change everything. Your whole life will settle right down. No problem. Somebody over there, come on. Yeah. I take you very seriously. I do. Well, because my brother had a phobia too. You're going to see it's not like yours, but akin in a way. So this poem's called How Some of It Happened. Some of you may know that in those early days of AIDS, your whole body broke down very quickly, no matter how young you were. So how some of it happened. My brother was afraid, even as a boy, of going blind. So deeply that he would turn the dinner knives away from looking at him, he said, as they lay on the kitchen table. He would throw a sweatshirt over those knobs that used to lock the car door from the inside. And once he dismantled a chandelier in the middle of the night when everyone was sleeping. We found the pile of sharp and shining crystals in the upstairs hall. So you understand. It was terrible when they clamped his one eye open and put the needle in through his cheek and up and into his eye from underneath. and left it there for a full minute before they drew it out once a week for many weeks. He learned to lean into it, to settle down, he said. And still the eye went dead, ulcerated, breaking up green in his head as the other eye, still blue and wide open, looked and looked at the clock. My brother promised me he wouldn't die after our father died. He shook my hand on a train going home one Christmas and gave me 5 years. As clearly as he promised, he'd be home for breakfast when I watched him walk into that New York City autumn night. By 9, I promise. And he did come back. But 5 years later, he promised 5 years more. So much for the brave pride of premonition, the worry that won't let it happen. You know, he said, I always knew I would die young. And then I got sober. And I thought, okay, I'm not. I'm going to see 30 and live to be an old man. And now it turns out that I am going to die. Isn't that funny? One day it happens, what you have feared all your life. The unendurably specific, the exact thing, no matter what you say or do. This is what my brother said. He said, here, sit closer to the bed so I can see you. One of the, poetry that knows that we're alive and dying at the same time. That's one of the great things about this art. It holds that all the time. You know, you can't, all poetry holds that knowledge. And so in that way, I think it resuscitates us, it wakes us up to that fact and to the nowness and the preciousness of the now. So here's a poem called The Gate. I had no idea that the gate I would step through to finally enter this world would be the space my brother's body made. He was taller than me, a young man, but grown, himself by then, done at 28, having folded every sheet, rinsed every glass he would ever rinse under the cold and running water. This is what you have been waiting for, he used to say to me. And I would say, what? And he would say, this. And I was holding up my cheese and mustard sandwich. And I would say, what? And he would say, this. Sort of looking around. So here's my dead friends for David. My dead friends. I had a lot of friends who died in the early stages of the AIDS pandemic now. My dead friends. When I have begun, when I'm weary and can't decide an answer to a bewildering question, to ask my dead friends for their opinion. And the answer is often immediate and clear. Should I take the job? Move to the city? Should I try to conceive a child in my late middle age? They stand in unison, shaking their heads and smiling. Whatever leads to joy, they always answer, to more life and less worry. I look into the vase where Billy's ashes were. It's green in there, a green vase. And I ask Billy if I should return the difficult phone call. And he says yes. Billy's already gone through the frightening door. Whatever he says to do, I'll do. So we were talking earlier about writing, and so much of writing for me is writing a lot and throwing it out. Because, as John would say, I knew that already. So it's writing and writing and writing until the poem actually begins to write me, which is a great, great feeling. And this is a poem that ended up being the title of this book because I was working on 4 or 5 different poems, and a very long day, and finally just pushed them aside, decided to give up writing a poem and just write to my dead brother, John. And it ended up being what wanted to be written. And it's called What the Living Do. Johnny, the kitchen sink has been clogged for days. Some utensil probably fell down there. And the Drano won't work, but smells dangerous. And the crusty dishes have piled up, waiting for the plumber I still haven't called. This is the everyday we spoke of. It's winter again. The sky is a deep, headstrong blue, and the sunlight pours through the open living room windows because the heat's stuck on too high in here, and I can't turn it off. For weeks now, driving or dropping a bag of groceries in the street, the bag breaking, I've been thinking, this is what the living do. And yesterday, hurrying along those wobbly bricks in the Cambridge sidewalk, spilling my coffee down my wrist and sleeve, I thought it again and again later when buying a hairbrush. This is it. Parking, slamming the car door shut in the cold, what you called that yearning, what you finally gave up. We want the spring to come and the winter to pass. We want whoever to call or not call, a letter, a kiss, but we want more and more and then more of it. But there are moments walking when I catch a glimpse of myself in the window glass, say the window of the corner video store, and I'm gripped by a cherishing so deep for my own blowing hair, chapped face, and unbuttoned coat that I'm speechless. I am living. I remember you. Thank you. So at 52, I adopted a daughter. I was divorced. And I adopted a little girl from China who was 3. And this next book was really written during that time. It's called The Kingdom of Ordinary Time. And when I was growing up in the Missal, there were these long swaths of time called ordinary time in the liturgical calendars, right? And I loved that, the coming of ordinary time, first Sunday of ordinary time. And it was the swaths of time between the high holy seasons when nothing apparently miraculous was happening. And I'll tell you a secret. I was finished this book, but I couldn't decide what to call it. And I kept thinking it was either going to be called The Coming of Ordinary Time or The Kingdom of Heaven. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that I called a psychic about another matter. Well, I just called her because all my friends were talking to her. And she said, "You finished a book." And I said, "Yes, I did." And she said, "What's it called?" And I said, "It's either The Coming of Ordinary Time or The Kingdom of Heaven." And she said, "No, it's The Kingdom of Ordinary Time." And I said, "You're right." Nothing else she said made sense. But there you go. The star market. The people Jesus loved were shopping at the star market yesterday. An old lead-colored man standing next to me at the checkout breathed so heavily I had to step back a few steps. Even after his bags were packed, he still stood breathing hard and hawking into his hand. The feeble, the lame, I could hardly look at them. Shuffling through the aisles, they smelled of decay, as if the star market had declared a day off for the able-bodied, and I had wandered in with the rest of them. Sour milk, bad meat, looking for cereal and spring water. Jesus must have been a saint, I said to myself, looking for my lost car in the parking lot later, stumbling among the people who would have been lowered into rooms by ropes, who would have crept out of caves or crawled from the corners of public baths on their hands and knees, begging for mercy. If I touch only the hem of his garment, one woman thought, could I bear the look on his face when he wheels around? This is a poem called After the Movie, but really it should be called After the Divorce. My ex-husband and I are really good friends now, but, took a year or so. Okay, After the Movie. So the movie, just to let you in on it, was The Talented Mr. Ripley, remember? The early Matt Damon, before he was born or anything. After the movie. And there's a reference to Meister Eckhart. Some of you may know Meister Eckhart, the great 13th century theologian, loved Meister Eckhart. And then a reference to Simone Weil, the 20th century theologian and political activist. And a reference to Janis Joplin. After the movie. My friend Michael and I are walking home arguing about the movie. He says that he believes a person can love someone and still be able to murder that person. I say no. That's not love. That's attachment. Michael says, no, that's love. You can love someone, then come to a day when you're forced to think it's him or me, think me, and kill him. I say, then it's not love anymore. Michael says, it was love up till then, though. I say, maybe we mean different things by the same word. Michael says, humans are complicated. Love can exist even in the murderous heart. I say that what he might mean by love is desire. Love is not a feeling, I say. And Michael says, then what is it? We're walking along West 16th Street, a clear, unclouded night. And I hear my voice repeating what I used to say to my husband. Love is action, I used to say, and say, and say to him. Simone Weil says that when you really love, you are able to look at someone you want to eat and not eat them. Janis Joplin says, take another little piece of my heart right now. Meister Eckhart says that as long as we love any image, we are doomed to live in purgatory. Michael and I stand on the corner of 6th Avenue saying goodnight. I can't drink enough of the tangerine spritzer I've just bought. Again and again, I bring the cold can to my mouth and suck the stuff from the hole the flip top made. What are you doing tomorrow? Michael says. But what I think he's saying is, you are too strict, Marie. You are a nun. Then I think, do I love Michael enough to allow him to think these things of me, even if he's not thinking them? Above Manhattan, the moon wanes and the sky turns clearer and colder, although the days after the solstice have started to lengthen. We both know the winter has only begun. Thank you so much. In the middle of this book is a series of poems in the voice of Mary, the mother of Jesus. I do love Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart said two very radical things about Mary. Some of you may well know this. He said, perhaps Jesus is the fruit of Mary's enlightenment. Let's just say that again. It's so radical. Perhaps Jesus is the fruit of Mary's enlightenment. And then he goes on to say, each of us can become the mother of God, which is why they wanted to kill him. But he died first. I love Maestro Eckhart. These are in the form of sonnets, very loose sonnets. This is Mary before she was a mother, before she was young. She was just bewildered, like most of us, wondering about things. Sometimes the moon sat in the well at night, and when I stirred it with a stick, it broke. If I kept stirring, it swirled like white water, as if water were light, and the stick a wand that made the light follow, then slow into water again, unwobbling, until the wind moved it. And I thought of all the moons, floating in the wells and rivers, spilling over rocks where the water broke. Moons in the sheep water and the chicken water, or here or there an oar bent it, or a woman spread out her skirt and let it pool there. The light, I mean, not the moon in a circle, not the moon itself, but the light that fell from it. Once or twice or 3 times I saw something rise from the dust in the yard, like the soul of the dust, or from the field, the soul body of the field, rise and hover like a veil in the sun, billowing, as if I could see the wind itself. I thought I did it, but I didn't. As if the edges of things blurred, so what was in bled out, breathed up and mingled, bush and cow, dust and well, breathed a field I walked through waist high, as through high grass or water, my fingers swirling through it or it through me. I saw it. It was thing and spirit, both. The real world, evident, invisible. How you can't move moonlight? You have to go there and stand in it. You can't coax it from your bed to come and shine there. You can't carry it in a bucket or cup it in your hands to drink. Wind won't blow it. A bird flying through it won't tear it. You can't sell it or buy it or save it or earn it or own it. Erase it or block it from shining on the mule's bristly back, dog's snout, duck, bill, cricket, toad. Shallow underwater stones gleam underwater. And the man who has just broken the neck of his child, he's standing by the window, moonlight pouring on his face and throat. You think this happened only once and long ago? Think of a summer night and someone talking across the water. Maybe someone you loved in a boat, and you could hear the oars dripping from half a lake away, and they were far and close at once. You didn't need to touch them or call to them or talk about it later. The sky was what you breathed, the lake sky that fell as rain. I have been like you, filled with worry, then relief. The wind is sky moving. It happens all the time. Now, I was fortunate to know the poet Stanley Kunitz. Does anybody here know Stanley Kunitz's work? 2 people. Stanley was a remarkable soul who lived to be 101. And at 100, he was in excellent shape. And he said, "Oh, I miss being 90. It's a good thing to remember when you're feeling old, you know? "Oh, I miss being 90. So I showed this little series of poems to him, and he said, "Now you must write an enunciation poem." I'm like, "No way, can't do that." I tried and 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 tried. And then, as sometimes happens, for better or for worse, this poem just wrote itself, came slipping right out all on its own. And it's the Annunciation in Mary's voice. Even if I don't see it again, nor ever feel it, I know it is, and that if once it hailed me, it ever does. And so it is myself I want to turn in that direction, not as towards a place, but it was a tilting within myself as one turns a mirror to flash the light to where it isn't. I was blinded like that and swam in what shone at me, only able to endure it by being no one. And so, specifically myself, I thought I'd die from being loved like that. Thank you. So I'm just going to read a couple more. This is my latest book. It's called Magdalene, and my daughter took this photograph on the cover when she was about 15. Very proud of it. It's in the voice of Mary Magdalene, who, as we know, has been so terribly maligned by the Western churches for so long. She's often depicted as a prostitute, as a repentant prostitute. And of course, there's no evidence at all that she was that. And so for me, and for I think some women, she's represented the terrible wound women have had to endure in this culture. The split between the body and the soul, the sexual and the sacred, and even heaven and earth. So this book is an attempt to begin to approach that wound and to try to speak of it and to begin to heal it. It's begun with a quote from one of the Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel according to Thomas. And here's the quote. His disciples said, "When will you be visible to us? And when will we see you?" And Jesus said, "When you undress and are not ashamed." Here's a poem that begins, it starts the book, and it's called Before the Beginning. Was I ever virgin? Did someone touch me before I could speak? Who had me before I knew I was an I? So that I wanted that touch again and again without knowing who or why or from whence it came. We know, here's a poem called The Affliction. When I walked across the room, I saw myself walking, as if I were someone else. When I picked up a fork, when I pulled off a dress, as if I were in a movie. It's what I thought you saw when you looked at me. So when I looked at you, I didn't see you. I saw the me I thought you saw, as if I were someone else. I called that outside, watching. Well, I didn't call it anything when it happened all the time. But one morning, after I had stopped taking the pills, standing in the kitchen for 1 second, I was inside, looking out. Then I popped back outside and saw myself looking. Would it happen again? It did. A few days later, my friend Wendy was pulling on her winter coat, standing by the kitchen door, and suddenly I was inside and I saw her. I looked out from my own eyes and I saw her eyes, blue, gray, transparent, and inside them, Wendy herself. Then I was outside again. And Wendy was saying, bye-bye, see you soon, as if nothing had happened. She hadn't noticed. She hadn't known that I had been there for maybe 40 seconds and that then I was gone. She hadn't noticed that I had not been there for months, years, the entire time she'd known me. I needn't have been embarrassed to have been there for those seconds. She had not noticed the difference. This happened on and off for weeks. And then I was looking at my old friend John. Suddenly I was in, and I saw him, and this was almost unbearable. He saw me see him, and I saw him see me. He said something like, "You're going to be okay now," or "It's been difficult, hasn't it?" But what he said mattered only a little. We met in our mutual gaze, in between, a third place I had not yet been. I have to just read one poem with the girl in it. You know, to write this book, I put on a mask, really, and many of the poems are autobiographical. Some aren't. We were talking earlier about how you use the life as wood to burn to make the poem. So the life isn't that important. In my life, it's no more important than, of course, anyone else's. But you use it, you burn it out. So here's a poem called Walking Home, if I can find it. Because the girl, of course, is the wise one in this book. Here it is. Walking home. Everything dies, I said. How had that started? A tree? The winter? Not me, she said. And I said, oh yeah? And she said, I'm reincarnating. Ha, she said, see you in a few thousand years. Why years, I wondered. Why not minutes, days? She found that so funny. Ha ha, doubled over. Years, she said confidently. I think you and I have known each other a few lifetimes, I said. She said, I have never before been a soul on this earth. It was cold. We were hungry. Next time, you be the mother, I said. No way, Jose, she said, as we turned the last windy corner. Yeah. And now I'll just finish with this. This is a poem called Magdalene and the Seven Devils. One of the things we know about Magdalene is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verse 2, where she's referred to as Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 devils had been cast out. So this is Mary talking about her devils. Perhaps some of us here have devils that have been cast out or have yet to be cast out. Magdalene, the 7 devils. The first was that I was very busy. The second, I was different from you. Whatever happened to you could not happen to me, not like that. The third, I worried. The fourth, envy, disguised as compassion. The fifth was that I refused to consider the quality of life of the aphid. The aphid disgusted me, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The mosquito too, its face, and the ant, its bifurcated body. Okay, the first was that I was so busy. The second, that I might make the wrong choice because I had decided to take that plane that day, that flight before noon, so as to arrive early, and I shouldn't have wanted that. The third was that if I walked past a certain place on the street, the house might blow up. The fourth was that I was made of guts and blood with a thin layer of skin lightly thrown over the whole thing. The fifth was that the dead seemed more alive to me than the living. The sixth, if I touched my right arm, I had to touch my left arm. And if I touched my left arm a little harder than I'd first touched the right, then I had to retouch the left and then touch the right again, so it would be even. The seventh, I knew I was breathing the expelled breath of everything that was alive, and I couldn't stand it. I wanted a sieve, a mask, I hate this word, a cheesecloth to breathe through that would trap it, whatever was inside everyone else that entered me when I breathed in. No, that was the first one. The second was that I was so busy. I had no time. How had this happened? How had our lives gotten like this? The third was that I couldn't eat food if I really saw it distinct, separate from me, in a bowl or on a plate. Okay, the first was that I could never get to the end of the list. The second was that the laundry was never finally done. The third was that no one knew me, although they thought they did, and that if people thought of me as little as I thought of them, then what was love? The fourth was that I didn't belong to anyone. I wouldn't allow myself to belong to anyone. The fifth was that I knew none of us could ever know what we didn't know. The sixth was that I projected onto others what I myself was feeling. The seventh was the way my mother looked when she was dying, the sound she made, her mouth wrenched to the right and cupped open so as to take in as much air, the gurgling sound so loud we had to speak louder to hear each other over it, and that I couldn't stop hearing it. Years later, grocery shopping, crossing the street, no, not the sound. It was her body's hunger, finally evident. What our mother had hidden all her life. For months I dreamt of knuckle bones and roots, the slabs of sidewalk pushed up like crooked teeth by what grew underneath. The underneath. That was the first devil. It was always with me. And that I didn't think you, if I told you, would understand any of this. Thank you. Thank you.
And this is why we have poets at Christian Scholars. Thank you, Marie. How many of you have been to Tokens before? Excellent. Then you know of our good friend Lee Camp and his many talents. And Marie has agreed to be a guest at Tokens tonight and will be interviewed by Lee Camp. I'm so looking forward to that. And also, Marie and Norton Press have given permission for the Tokens players to turn one poem, Eve's discussion, to music with violins, viola, and bass. And you don't realize how special that is, but those of us who have been there know how talented those people are. You're going to be amazed. In our session earlier today, Marie said, poetry, or just today, this afternoon, she said, poetry knows that we are living and dying at the same time. And then in our earlier session today, she said that poetry is the unsayable. It helps us say the unsayable. It lives in and among what cannot be said. And one of the things that I felt about her poetry was that I too look at those Bible stories and I think, what happened the next day? What was she thinking? What was he thinking? And she helps us, her poetry helps us think more deeply about those people who have become iconic stories for us as we read our Bible, but they were people. Uh-huh. And it's great that we have somebody who can help us think about those things. So, Marie, we're grateful for you and your presence, and David and I apologize for getting so emotional. But we'll live to tell about it. She is going to be outside for a book signing immediately after she signs my books, okay? So you can all go line up out there because she's going to be in here signing mine, and then we'll bring her out there. Thank you so much for being here today.